Stop scrolling. This isn't a movie montage with perfect lighting and heroic music swelling on cue. This is Afghanistan, where the air can be quiet enough to hear your own pulse, and a plan can turn into a funeral because someone blinked at the wrong time. Kandahar province. Before sunrise has even decided what color it wants to be, a message drops into a Navy SEAL commander's hands and makes his coffee taste like metal. Tonight you're hitting a Taliban compound tied to an IED pipeline. One of those networks that doesn't just kill troops, it changes the way everyone walks, drives, sleeps, and breathes. The target is a facilitator, a connector, the man who takes phone calls and turns them into roadside craters. And you're not going in alone. A foreign unit is inbound, Australian SASR. No warm-up, no joint training cycle, no time to learn each other's habits, jokes, or hand signals. Just a few brutal hours to weld two elite teams into one machine, and then shove that machine through a mud brick wall with zero room for misunderstanding. Here's the part that still makes hard men go quiet when they tell it. The assault wasn't the real danger. The real danger started when the assault worked, and the fight got bigger than anyone had planned for. What happened when the clocks ran out and the village woke up angry? What split-second decision prevented a civilian tragedy inside the compound? And what did the Australians do under pressure that made the SEAL commander rethink what elite even means? Stay with the story, because the last stretch contains the detail nobody expects, the small human moment that flips the entire meaning of the mission on its head. Forward Operating Base. Larkin didn't look like a birthplace for legends. It looked like dust and plywood, corrugated metal, HESCO barriers, and exhaustion. The kind of place where the wind carried grit into your teeth and every surface felt permanently stained by diesel fumes. But inside the Tactical Operations Center, the TOC, the world narrowed to a glowing screen. On the main display sat the target compound in the Jari district, laid out in high-resolution satellite imagery like a bruise in the middle of farmland. From above, it looked ordinary in the way dangerous places often do. A cluster of mud brick buildings, a courtyard, thick walls, a few outbuildings. Irrigation ditches cut the approaches into narrow channels, perfect for guiding men where you wanted them. High perimeter walls boxed in angles and limited sight lines. It wasn't a house, it was a fist. A fortress shaped like something built by people who expected visitors. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Riley stared at it until the geometry started to feel personal. Riley was 33 and had the lean, weathered look of someone who slept in short bursts and woke up already calculating risk. He'd earned his trident years earlier, and not in the glossy way civilians like to imagine. It hadn't been cinematic. It had been hunger, cold, salt water, instructors who lived to say again, and the private decision to keep moving when your body tried to bargain you out of it. In his world, confidence wasn't an attitude. It was arithmetic. Missions planned, doors breached, teammates returned. Tonight's math was ugly. Intelligence tied the compound to a bomb-making network responsible for dozens of coalition casualties in the last months. Numbers like that weren't abstract on a slide deck. They were empty bunks, names that didn't get said in casual conversation, and families waiting for phone calls that came too late. The compound sat in a village where the line between civilian and insurgent didn't exist as a line at all. It was a blur that only snapped into focus at the moment someone fired a weapon. A teenage boy with a phone could be a kid filming something exciting, or a spotter passing positions to men in the ditches. A farmer could be a farmer, or a man forced to carry a rifle because someone threatened his children. In places like this, precision wasn't a virtue you bragged about, it was survival. Riley's platoon wasn't a loose collection of strangers, 16 SEALs who had been together through deployments, who rehearsed breaches until the movements lived in muscle memory, who understood each other in the smallest ways, who would take the left corner without being told, who would already be covering the stairwell while you were still thinking about it. They had a plan. It was drilled, it was ready, and then higher headquarters dropped a wrench into the center of the map like it was a routine admin change. Australian SASR inbound. Joint operation. ETA 1100. Riley read it twice, like the words might rearrange themselves into something less insane. Who adds a brand new team to a direct action raid hours before execution and calls it interoperability? Who signs that risk in ink? And who eats the blame if the seam tears open in the dark and someone shoots the wrong silhouette? Riley felt the irritation rise, then shoved it down where it belonged. Anger didn't clear rooms. Time did not expand because you wanted it to. In Afghanistan, time always belonged to the enemy. They had a shrinking window, a target that might vanish, a village that could turn into a swarm, and now a foreign element arriving like an untested gear dropped into a moving engine. By mid-morning, the TOC didn't feel like a planning room. It felt like a pressure chamber. The air was stale and sharp under fluorescent lights, and every voice sounded half a notch louder than it needed to be. Riley walked through contingencies, breach points, approach routes, casualty collection, extraction. He stared at the compound walls and saw timing windows and blind corners. He imagined the angles where a single burst of fire could trap men in a hallway, where a wrong grenade could become a strategic nightmare. Rules of engagement in that village weren't a guideline. They were a razor. Speed saved lives, restraint saved futures, violence of action broke ambushes, discipline kept you from creating your own. Hold all of that at once, or you weren't elite. You were just loud. Then the rotors arrived. At exactly 11, the desert silence cracked apart as two Black Hawks thundered into the landing zone. Dust erupted in a violent brown wall, swallowing the horizon and turning the world into a churning storm. Riley stepped outside, squinting into the glare, feeling the downwash hammer his chest. The helicopter settled. Doors slid open. 12 figures moved out into the heat. Riley expected swagger, the kind of chest-out, look-at-us confidence that sometimes infected units with reputations. He expected something theatrical. What he got was flow. The Australians didn't strut. They didn't rush. They moved with a calm efficiency that felt almost unsettling, like men who had done this too many times to waste energy on emotion. Their gear was dusty and worn, but everything about it looked maintained with obsessive care. Rifles sat naturally in hands, heads turned in quiet sector scans, no wasted motion, no posturing. Their leader approached through the settling dust. He was tall, lean, late 30s maybe, with a face that looked sun-cured, creased by wind and long nights. He offered a hand. Major Tom Nguyen, he said, SASR. His grip was firm without trying to win anything. His eyes were steady, flat in the way that suggested he wasn't impressed by the setting, the flags, or the reputations. He was simply assessing. Riley shook his hand and felt a small internal shift. This wasn't a visiting unit. This was a professional element arriving ready to work. No time for speeches. Inside the TOC, the room tightened as both teams crowded around the screen. Sweat, dust, gun oil, and tension mixed into a scent that always meant the same thing, an approaching threshold. Riley ran the plan fast. Target layout, latest intel, probable enemy count, civilians likely present. The compound's ugly confidence, the ditches that funneled movement, the walls that turned angles into traps. Nguyen listened like a predator listening to the wind. When Riley finished, Nguyen didn't offer a lecture. He asked 3 questions. Clean questions. Surgical, radio compatibility, medevac timeline, and the exact composition of the courtyard wall, mud brick, reinforced thickness. No ego, no performance, just the stripping away of ambiguity. Riley assigned sectors. Americans would breach the main entrance, Australians would hit the north wall and roll inward. Link up in the courtyard, find the facilitator, extract before the village realized what had happened. Dusk timing, enough light to see, enough shadow to confuse. Nguyen nodded once, no debate, no drama. He repeated the timing and turned to his men. His voice didn't bark. It carried in that broad Australian cadence, flat, calm, almost casual. But the operators responded like parts of a single organism. The theory looked good, but maps don't shoot back, so they went to the rehearsal pit outside the wire, a rough patch of dirt where engineers tape out mock walls and men rehearse death as a form of prevention. Stones mark doorways, tape measured corridors. The compound became a ghost version of itself. For 20 minutes, the movement was smoother than Riley expected. The Australians adapted to American rhythms instantly. Hand signals translated, spacing clicked. It felt almost too easy. And in war, too easy is often the first warning. Friction came where it always comes, at the point where tactics meet consequences. During a run-through of the North Breach, one of Riley's younger operators, Petty Officer Lucas Crash Miller, 24, talented and aggressive, stopped the flow and pointed at the charge placement. That's light, Miller said. Bigger hit, faster entry. Keep momentum. He wasn't wrong on paper. A bigger blast meant a quicker hole. The rehearsal pit went quiet in the way it goes quiet when men feel a line being crossed. An American subordinate questioning a foreign team leader, pride and physics colliding. Riley watched Nguyen carefully. A lesser leader might have snapped, pulled rank, made it personal. Nguyen did none of that. He looked at the taped doorway, then at Miller, and spoke like he was explaining something to a competent peer. Hallway behind that door, Nguyen said, calm as a man ordering lunch, is used as sleeping space. Family, kids, center charge sends fragments straight through at chest height. He pointed to the hinges. This cut drops the door and throws energy outward. Still fast, less irreversible. No raised voice, no moral sermon, just a simple brutal truth. Speed can be purchased with innocent blood, and you don't always get to undo what you buy. Miller looked at Riley, expecting the commander to side with aggression. Riley stared at the dirt diagram and felt the weight of command settle into his ribs. He saw the logic. He saw the discipline. He saw the difference between being effective and being careless. We're running Nguyen's method, Riley said. No hesitation, no apology. The pit exhaled. Something shifted. Subtle, but real. The SEALs saw their commander respect the Australians enough to defer. The Australians saw the Americans value outcome over ego. They ran it again, and again, and again, until the timing became identical and the movement stopped feeling like two teams sharing a space and started feeling like one team breathing through two accents. But trust built in daylight is one thing. Trust built when the world goes loud is another. At 5 in the afternoon, the desert light began to bend into long shadows, turning the ground bruised and uneven. The teams loaded into the Blackhawks. Inside the cabin, the vibration felt like a second heartbeat. No jokes, no bravado. Only the internal silence of men preparing to do violence and accept consequences. Riley sat across from Nguyen as the helicopter chewed through air. Neither spoke. You don't waste words before a threshold. You save them for whatever comes after, if there is an after. They touched down 2 kilometers from the target in twilight. Dust rose. The birds lifted away and the valley swallowed sound again. On foot, they moved in parallel columns through irrigation ditches and dried fields. Night vision turned the world into a narrow tunnel of grainy green. Every sound felt amplified. Every twig under a boot could become a gunshot in the imagination. Radio traffic stayed minimal. Short clicks, position checks, timing confirmations. They were ghosts moving toward a clenched fist. At the breach points, the world paused. Riley pressed against the outer wall, feeling the rough mud brick under his glove. He could hear voices inside, men talking, laughing, the clink of cups, the normal texture of a night that didn't know it was about to be shattered. He keyed his radio, whispered that he was set. Nguyen's voice came back calm enough to be unsettling. North set. The synchronization was perfect. No drift, no confusion. Riley began the count in his head. 3, 2, 1, and then the world broke. The charges detonated simultaneously, not so much a sound as a physical odor, air punching out of lungs, ground trembling. The main gate collapsed inward. Dust and smoke surged up like a living thing. Riley's team flooded through, weapons up, moving with the practiced aggression of close-quarters battle. The first insurgents they saw didn't even get time to understand the new rules of the night. Controlled shots, clean movement, corner zone before the enemy could claim them. The compound turned into a maze of shadow and noise. Through the chaos, Riley listened for the Australians, tracking them by rhythm. Their gunfire sounded different, not louder, not more frantic, more composed. No long bursts, no panic, just precise, repeating cracks, like a metronome ticking down someone else's life. It was working, too well, until 3 minutes in, the plan hit its first wall. In the central courtyard, Riley's element ran into a hard pocket of resistance. Taliban fighters had dug in behind stacked crates and a low stone barrier, creating a kill angle that pinned the SEALs in a narrow corridor. The geometry was bad, the kind that turns operators into targets. Riley assessed in flashes. Grenades were risky. Unknown civilians. Smoke would blind his own shooters. A direct push would cost blood. The assault stalled. And in raids, stalls are where funerals begin to form. Then the radio cracked. Not a question, not a request, a statement of intent. Moving, Nguyen said. From the north corridor, an angle the defenders didn't expect because they believed it was secure. The Australians appeared. They hadn't finished their whole sector. Nguyen made a decision anyway, hearing the volume of fire, reading the stall through sound. They flowed into the courtyard like a synchronized blade, and the Taliban fighters found themselves caught in crossfire they hadn't planned for. The resistance ended in seconds, not with chaos, with finality. Nguyen stepped in close, checked Riley with a glance. "Are you good? Still moving? Still breathing?" Riley nodded, adrenaline burning his throat. "Appreciate it," he said. Nguyen's reply was almost absurd in its calm. "No worries, mate." Then he turned back to work. They found the facilitator in a back room, moving toward a hidden tunnel entrance under a rug like a man who had practiced escape routes more than he'd practiced faith. He didn't vanish. The SEAL secured him, zip ties biting into wrists. The mission objective suddenly a living, breathing wait. From breach to capture, 8 minutes, textbook. And that's when Afghanistan reminded them, as it always does, that the enemy gets a vote. The talk feed hit Riley's ear mid-movement, urgent, clipped. Drone eyes overhead had spotted movement. Not a few runners, a force. 30-plus fighters surging from a neighboring village, flowing through ditches like water, finding a crack. Reinforcements intelligence hadn't predicted. Men who knew the terrain because it was their terrain. Riley did the math instantly. They had minutes before the compound became a cage. Extraction birds were inbound, 12 minutes out. 12 minutes can be an eternity when you're low on ammunition and high on attention. Riley and Nguyen moved with the same urgency without needing to discuss it. Sectors assigned, fields of fire overlapping, perimeter established. The compound that had been the target became the fortress they now needed to survive inside. The Taliban hit hard, fast, and angry. RPG impacts punched mud brick into the air. Automatic fire stitched across walls. Traces cut the darkness like red needles. The air filled with that sharp snapping sound of rounds passing too close. Riley's men fired in controlled bursts, conserving ammo, buying seconds. Nguyen's voice on the radio stayed steady, calling targets, keeping his team disciplined when the natural human response to being surrounded is to pour bullets like water and hope fear solves the math. Then Riley saw something that stuck with him years later. On the east side, Taliban fighters used a deep irrigation ditch as a covered approach, moving toward a damaged section of wall. A smart route, a dangerous one. One of the Australians, Sergeant Quiet, a man Riley hadn't spoken to, noticed it and acted without ceremony. He pulled a grenade, judged distance and arc under fire like a man tossing a rock into a river back home, and threw. The grenade sailed into the ditch and detonated exactly where it needed to. Dirt collapsed. The approach route choked. A single throw changed the shape of the fight. Riley keyed his radio, half disbelief in his voice. "Whoever did that just closed the east ditch," Nguyen replied, like he was discussing the weather. "Cooper, he's handy." Minutes bled away. 4 minutes. 3. The Taliban shifted, concentrating fire on the north side, trying to break the Australians, sensing that the discipline there was the spine of the defense. The noise grew heavier, uglier. The Australians didn't waver. No calls for help, no panic, just steady work. Then the sound they'd been waiting for rolled across the night like salvation. Rotor blades, Blackhawks incoming, but they couldn't land into a storm of accurate fire. The teams needed to create a pocket of suppression long enough for the birds to touch down, load, and claw back into the sky. Riley made the call. All elements suppress, heads down, 90 seconds. What happened next became the story Riley would tell for the rest of his career. The Australians didn't simply increase volume. They executed a coordinated fire plan, synchronized waves of suppression, overlapping lanes, controlled rhythm that made it almost impossible for the Taliban to settle into aim. It wasn't noise, it was orchestration. The birds came in low, dust exploding under their downwash. Both teams collapsed perimeter and sprinted to the landing zone, maintaining rear security, shooting only when it mattered, moving like a single unit under one heartbeat. Riley counted heads, 16 SEALs, 12 SASR, target secured, no one left behind. The helicopters lifted, taking rounds, climbing hard into black sky. For half a second it felt like victory, and then war reached up anyway. A round punched through thin metal and found Miller, Crash Miller, the young SEAL who'd argued for the bigger charge. He folded to the cabin floor, shock widening his eyes, blood spread fast, dark in the dim light. The cabin erupted into motion, but not chaos, motion with purpose. Two Australians unbuckled without waiting for orders. They moved across the cabin like instinct, placing their bodies between the open door and the wounded American, becoming living armor. One applied pressure, the other fired out the doorway, suppressing threats below. Human shields for a man they'd met less than 12 hours earlier. Nguyen was there in a flash, hands moving with practiced speed. Tourniquet, check time, check pulse, lean close to be heard over engines. "You'll be right," Nguyen shouted into Miller's ear, voice carrying that strange Australian humor even in the worst moment. "You'll have a story for the pub." It wasn't a joke to be funny, it was a refusal to let fear win. Miller's breathing steadied. Color fought its way back into his face. The Australian stayed over him until the helicopter was well beyond effective fire. Riley watched it happen and felt something shift in him that no briefing or alliance document could manufacture. He'd worked with allies before, shared meals, traded patches, smiled for photos. But this wasn't that. This was brotherhood forged by action, by men choosing, without hesitation, to risk themselves for someone else's team because the code demanded it. Treaties don't do that. Character does. Back at FOB Larkin, medics waited on the pad. Miller disappeared into bright lights and urgent hands. Riley stood on the tarmac, dust-coated, ears ringing, adrenaline draining out of him in a cold wave. Nguyen stood nearby, lighting a cigarette with hands that didn't shake. Riley walked over, extended a hand that still felt slightly unsteady. Nguyen took it. The grip was the same as earlier, firm, calm, unchanged. Riley tried to find words for the grenade throw, the coordinated suppression, the bodies thrown between a wounded man and open sky. But in that world, speeches are mostly for people who weren't there. A handshake was enough. Nguyen's mouth twitched into the first real smile Riley had seen from him. "Same again sometime, mate." Riley nodded. "Anytime." The debrief later was routine on paper. Objective achieved, facilitator detained, resistance encountered, QRF engaged, successful extraction. But the lesson was not in the checklist. The lesson was in the way two teams had become one under pressure. Over the next months, Riley's platoon and Nguyen's SASR troop ran mission after mission together. Safe houses in Kandahar, cache sites in Helmand, late-night raids where silence mattered more than courage. They learned each other's rhythms so deeply that coordination became instinct. The SEALs picked up small techniques, angles, spacing, the Australians' almost uncanny calm. The Australians absorbed American systems and aerial integration like they'd been born into it. More importantly, they learned the kind of trust you can't order. Other units heard about it. Rangers, Marine Special Operations, others. They wanted to see what the Australians were like, to understand the rumors. And the Australians, in that distinctly unpretentious way, just kept showing up, doing the work, and disappearing back into dust without asking for applause. Years later, a senior American operator would describe working with SASR in one sentence that stuck. "They meet the standard every time. No excuses, no bad days. You raise your game because you don't want to be the weak link around them." Riley went home from that deployment with a different definition of interoperability. Not a buzzword, not a staff slide, a lived truth. He spoke in planning meetings about building real partnerships, not just sharing a helicopter ride. He pushed for exchanges, joint training, integration that treated allies as equals rather than add-ons. Nguyen kept deploying, then vanished into other conflicts that never made the news. He trained younger Australians the way he lived: excellence without arrogance, courage without recklessness, loyalty without hesitation. The facilitator they captured that night provided intel that unraveled more than one IED chain. Lives were saved later because one man was pulled out of a tunnel instead of disappearing into the earth. But if you ask Riley what mattered most, he won't start with the detainee or the drone feed. He'll start with the rehearsal pit under the hard Afghan sun, when a foreign officer quietly explained how to breach a door without turning a hallway into tragedy, and an American commander chose discipline over ego. And he'll end with the helicopter cabin, when two Australians threw themselves between open sky and a bleeding SEAL without needing to be told. Because that's the detail that changes is the meaning of the mission, not the bullets, not the explosions, not even the success. The moment where ally became brother in the only language that counts in war, action. So if this story reminds you why real partnerships matter, why excellence recognizes excellence regardless of accent or flag, carry it forward, tell it, share it. Remember that the quiet professionals are often the ones who shape outcomes the most, because courage speaks a universal language, and the hardest missions don't just demand skill, they demand character.